Scottish chartered accountant from Seattle to come and talk to you about innovation for the next generation, the tag had sort of lost their mind. So what I wanted to do, since I'm certainly not from Apple, I'm not from Facebook, I'm not from any of the sort of internet startups. Can we go to the slides, please? We'll get there in a second. What I wanted to do was give you a little bit of context in terms of my career, my background, and some of the things I think informs technology development for the next generation, innovation for the next generation. So I've spent all of my career in the business-to-business sector. I've really worked for 4 companies since I got out of college. I worked for KPMG, I worked for Thomson Reuters for a number of years. I worked for a startup company in the Atlanta area, actually, which was bought by a company in the Atlanta area called iClick. And for the last 10 years, I've worked for Vertafore. So some of you may think, well, which of these companies was the most innovative? Which one did you actually learn from? And I would say, with all due respect to my friends in the accounting profession, KPMG at the time I worked for them was not the most innovative company in the world. I'm sure that's changed. I'm sure there's lots of other things happening in the accounting profession. But we were still working in the old 16-column spreadsheets with paper and pencil, and maybe if you were lucky, a calculator. But the other 3 companies were all innovative in their own way. Thomson Reuters was the company I spent about 13 years with, and they really transformed the business during the period I was there. When I first started with Thomson, we were essentially a print publishing company. That's all we did. We published books, we published magazines, we published loose-leaf journals. And that was really the strategy that the Thomson family had set out. They had made a fortune in oil and gas, and they wanted to invest in something that wasn't going to change. Now, the printing industry hadn't changed since the time of Caxton, 1400 or so really not much was going to change in the world from a technology point of view until this was a safe way to protect their investment. Now, obviously, over the last 20 plus years, the Thomson family and the company have transformed themselves. They've really embraced technology, and I think have done it in a way that allowed them to balance the needs of the customer, the employee, and obviously the shareholder, which we'll come back and talk about in a second. Now, it was hard to get the shareholders on board. And I think that's one of the first things that I would encourage each of you to think about as you think about innovation for the next generation. Let's make sure that the people that are providing you the money, the people that are looking for a return, are absolutely in lockstep with you in terms of how you're spending the resources, in terms of how you're building the business. I would encourage you to have complete transparency in that sector. The second thing that Thomson did was interesting is we had to drag the customers into this world of new technology. We were dealing with people who were fairly staid. We were dealing with lawyers and accountants and investment professionals who didn't want to change the way they've been doing things over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And occasionally it was really a problem. I remember one meeting, and unfortunately it was with Ernst & Young, where the partner in charge of procurement, we just demoed this information solution on CD-ROM. It was a Windows-based product, had all these kind of good things going for it, ability to search really quickly. And he looked at me at the end of the presentation and he said, "This is a really interesting application. Can you tell me, is it Windows or is it CD-ROM? How do you answer that question?" Fortunately, our CTO, who was with me, jumped to his feet and said, "That's a great question, and we're the only company in this industry that's been able to combine the best of both technologies in one solution." I then spent a very brief period with iClick, which was, as I said, a startup in Westchester County. It was ultimately bought by Bert Ellis, who had IXL and Consumer Financial Network. I think he's one of the legends in all ways of the Atlanta business community. Unfortunately for us and unfortunately for Bert, that was a time that was tough to make a lot of money. It was certainly a time when you could find a way of making a small fortune in the information sector or the software sector. Unfortunately for Bert and his other investors, they did by taking a really large investment and watching it shrink over the next couple of years. So iClick in many ways had all the labels of innovation sitting around it. It was a company that was young, it was startup, people worked crazy hours, we were all incented by stock options. But I think when it came to real sustainable innovation, it was probably the least innovative company I've worked with because they only had one idea. Now maybe it was a good idea, but it was an idea that everybody else in the space was able to copy, or everybody else in the space was able to think about in a new or slightly different way. So the last 10 years of my life I've spent with Vertafore, which is a company that's really in the insurance sector. We'll talk about it in a second. But it's a business that also has provided a lot of innovation. On the one level, it's certainly not the most interesting sector to work in. If we look at this and you say you work for a company that builds billing software for insurance agents, it's certainly sort of a place that if you're on a plane and you don't want to talk to the guy next to you, just tell him that's what you do for a living. He'll be grabbing the Bose headphones from the person in front and he won't bother you for the rest of the flight. But the interesting thing about this company, the interesting thing about this business, which had never made a nickel, it was founded around 1980, had never made a profit for the first 20 years of its life. The reasons why are probably not worth going into here. Over the last decade, we've provided a return of 3x to the first group of investors who invested in the company, StonePoint. We returned an investment of 4x to the next group of investors, Hellman and Friedman, who invested during a very soft period for the insurance sector. And we're on track, I think, with our new investor team from TPG to return a 3x investment. They bought the business last summer, and we're tracking in the right direction. So when we think about innovation, we think about balancing the needs of the customer, the needs of the employee, and the needs of the shareholder. You have to really keep them in balance over the long term if you're going to be successful. So a generation is a long time. A generation in terms of technology is a long time. A generation in terms of an investment period is a long time. So what are some of the things that we've been doing? What are some of the things that I've learned over the last 20 years as I think about real innovation and think about the ways that you can create value for your business? Now, this is not a presentation about technology, although I'll touch on technology specifically, but it is a presentation about how innovation in the technology sector can drive real value for you, for your customers, and for your shareholders. And really the key, I think, is continued intellectual curiosity. There's another pillar which I'll talk about at the end of the presentation, but when I talked about iClick failing, it was because we had this one idea, we couldn't get our energy away from this one good idea. It's about taking your time to look at the whole market, the whole domain space, and thinking about lots of different ideas. So if you think about it, first of all, I would encourage you that you'll probably make more money on a risk-adjusted basis. You'll probably do better on a risk-adjusted basis if you think about evolution, not revolution. And some of you say, well, that's not particularly fun, that's not particularly exciting. But when you look at the top 10 winners today, most of them were doing things that were evolutionary. Maybe they were groundbreaking in some small way, but they were taking a problem that existed and finding a new way to solve it. And I think we see that time and time again in business. I mean, Facebook in some ways did the same thing. So when we think about evolution, the other piece I want to just talk about is look for small advantages and discontinuities. Another interesting example from my time at Thomson, the first electronic product we built, the first electronic product that Thomson really built, was a CD-ROM-based product, as I said. And we were really pleased with the technology. It had SGML tagging, it had lots of compression, it used Folio search engine, so it was much more intuitive than Boolean software. And we thought this was going to be a rip-roaring success. So we launched the product, it was around 1992, 1993. The first 3 months, we couldn't sell it in New York City, couldn't sell it in San Francisco, couldn't even sell it in Atlanta. The place where we did best was down in Mississippi. We had a sales rep called Lee Meek. He was based in Jackson, Mississippi, and he made probably $300,000 in commission income that year. And Lee didn't care about any of the technology. What Lee did was went out and looked at the marketplace and said, I can solve a customer problem that's a big problem. It's a real pain point. And that pain point was the poor receptionist sitting at the front door of the accountant's office had to file 1,000 pages of updates every single week. And he went in and he said to her, would you like me to take away that pain point? Convinced her boss to buy a single-speed CD reader, and he was off to the races. It was proven through because the next time we had a big technology enhancement, which we thought was positive, which we thought was going to be evolutionary, the people in Mississippi didn't care. They didn't care about Windows. But Lee had really found the key to this discontinuity and the key for this small advantage, and he was able to make a great deal of progress for us. And really, in some ways, that became the catalyst for the change over the next 20 years with that business, which today is about a $1.5 billion company, probably making $300 million. The other thing that comes out from the education and the experience with Lee is I very much view that innovations is a qualitative process. You know, we get lots of feedback from people. You should be mining lots of data in the marketplace. You should be talking to as many customers as you can. You should be following people home, end user consumers home to their houses and see how they use the product in their environment. You should be looking at focus groups. All of those things are valid and true. But I think if you have a good idea and you can articulately express that idea to 3 people, and the first 3 people you talk to about it say that's a good idea, it probably is. I would encourage you, when you're thinking about innovation, you don't have to go and do a lot of fancy research. If you just get out into the marketplace you're dealing with and just touch the customer, touch the marketplace, really learn how they would be thinking about the solution you're developing, then you can go back and build it. Then you can go back and prototype it. Then you can go back and spend a lot of money on market research and so on and so forth. But it's not about the Excel spreadsheets. It's not about the financial projections. It's about having a really qualitative understanding and a qualitative process. I'm going to skip the next point just in terms of in time. We're going to try and keep this on track for a 1:30 wrap up. The third thing about innovation, particularly in the technology sector, is sometimes we overanalyze it in terms of it always being about the product. We always think about the product. And we never really get to the other components, which is what happens after you've built the product and you start to sell and service it. And our big connection with the Georgia marketplace, we'll talk about in a few minutes, is a company called ImageRight, which is based out in Conyers, Georgia. And they built initially a document management and scanning solution in the mid-1990s. It doesn't sound like a particularly exciting technology. Started to move slowly, then a little faster, then a little faster. And part of the magic of their innovation was not about the product. There certainly were some great things about the product. It was designed specifically for a niche marketplace. They understood the price point from their competitors. But they looked at the marketplace and they understood that people were being asked by technology providers to write a big check, write a check for $1 million or $2 million or $3 million, and come back in 9 months and we'll tell you whether the implementation went well or not. What ImageRight did is they went and implemented off the back of a letter of intent, so they didn't actually have a contract. They provided a money-back guarantee to their customers if this implementation didn't go well. And they followed up with an absolutely ruthless service model where they threw every single resource at it to make sure the implementation was successful, and then they kept rolling and rolling and rolling. And if you had looked at this space in the sort of mid of the last decade, 2005, 2006, ImageRight was a colossus and become a colossus in that sector, not just because of the product, but because they had innovated around the customer's real pain point, which was not about product, it was about sales and service and contractual terms and all those elements. So it doesn't have to be super complicated. It can be something that's quite simple, and if you're talking to customers and you're running into objections in the sales process, say, can I undo the objection? If the customer wants to see their data converted, can I convert their data for free and use that to help accelerate the selling process? Simple innovation, but it's really the key, I think, to driving many of our businesses. Next thing I think is critical as well. learned this lesson in spades. I think we've all seen it in our individual businesses. Innovation advances are absolutely transient. Many of us think that we have a technology for the next generation, for the next 20 years. I have really no idea what our business will look like 20 years from now. I have a pretty good idea what our business will look 5 years from now, but I know we need to move at an ever faster pace. So again, back to this notion of think about things where you're not getting into a false sense of precision. You're not over-engineering the solution. You're really thinking about how can I get something out quickly, because the market will ultimately close. I'm going to think again, going back to Facebook and the book and the movie The Social Network, we sort of saw that with Zuckerberg, right? He just did it in his dorm room. He had his great idea about putting your status up on Facebook or whatever. He ran off and programmed, he got it right out there. And the kids who had the more of the Ivy League pedigree and probably looked more like the part, they didn't get it done. They were too worried about raising money and thinking about the business model and all those kind of things. He just went and did it. Same thing in this context is those of you who have the resources, when you talk to your technology teams, when you talk to your product management teams, they will often say, we can build it better. We can go and build a better mousetrap. We don't need to be involved in that sort of acquisition game. We can really just go build everything ourselves. I would say you should have absolutely the opposite philosophy. I think my personal perspective is you should buy the capability if it exists somewhere else wherever possible. As long as you feel you can integrate the business profitably, as long as you feel you can grow the top line, the customers will deal with a little bit of kludginess in terms of the integration, but ultimately that's going to allow you to provide value to the market, that's going to allow you to innovate much more quickly. Last 2 points. Think down the stream. Again, I'm not going to talk about these 2 specific examples, but the absolute nirvana for any innovation is not if you think about your customer, but to think about their relationship with their customer. Because if you can do that, if you can start in a business-to-business environment to help them build a better relationship with their customer, what you're really talking about is not the back office, you're talking about the front office. What you're really not talking about is not capital expenditures, you're talking about revenue growth. And I think this is something that many people have talked about. I would say I'm not sure I can think of a situation where I've consistently been able to deliver against this question, but I think this is the place where innovation really hits home, because you can talk to the C-level person, you can talk to the CEO, you can talk to the CFO, you'll never have to do a demo. Pricing will not be a big constraint, because if you get them to buy off conceptually and here's something downstream for your customer, you'll absolutely make a gold mine over the short, medium, and long term. Last point. If you feel you've got strength, if you feel you've got the capabilities, don't think about evolution all the time. Occasionally dream big. The Harvard Business Review theory about BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. Step back from your business and think about what do we need to do that we can transform over the next 20 years. We heard some from folks earlier today who are going through this whirlwind of change in the healthcare revolution. Some of you may be sitting on the sidelines or have adjacencies to that marketplace and say, you know what, that's too big, that's too fast moving, that's too scary for me to get involved in. But I can encourage you, there's going to be fabulous, fabulous opportunities there. One of the things that Randy did not talk about is the shift to individual choice and the shift to the consumer. Many of the work that you do every single day is focused on the consumer marketplace. Those of you who are in the consumer business, the healthcare market is going to be a great opportunity. If you can help consumers with choice, if you can help consumers maneuver their way through the complexity of whatever it is the government puts on our shoulders, you will find a great opportunity. And so think about those things. Think about those situations where, okay, my core business is doing pretty well. Can I afford to take a little bit of money? Can I afford to take a little bit of resource? Can I afford to take 2 or 3 people and put them in this problem? Because if they can hit a home run, it's going to be a tremendous innovation for us. It's going to be great for our customers. It's going to be a great value driver. So it's really a continuum. I would encourage you to start with evolution and roll all the way around to revolution. But again, as you see, these are lessons that we've learned, lessons our company has learned, lessons the people that work with me have learned over a 20-year period, and they're not about specific technologies. So when you think about technology for the next 20 years, you know, these are some of the questions I would encourage you to think about in your business, in your daily lives, as you're having your planning and your brainstorming sessions, because this, I think, is what will help inform your innovation. We can all engineer the solutions. There's very little new physics out there. There may be a little bit. The heart stent thing looked pretty cool. I think that probably falls into the category of new physics. But generally, people are engineering with tools that already exist. So it's the capabilities out there, but it's all about this notion of intellectual curiosity really driving the value that way. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Georgia, which really I think is a tremendous case study. As Don mentioned, we have about 150 people in Conyers, Georgia, which, as Matt McKernan, who runs that business unit for me, pointed out, was not on the map today. A little unfortunate. It's sort of halfway to Athens. But when you look at the team that started the ImageRight business around 1995, they picked Conyers because it was sort of halfway between Atlanta and Athens, where one of the other founders started the business. They really wanted a place where they could tap into top schools and top talent. And they were able to do that. We have many great graduates. In some ways, when I look at our employee population, the average youngest age is probably still in the Conyers location because we're able to tap into recent college graduates. We didn't have to hire people who'd sort of been there, done that. We also had the advantage, which I think is huge from your business perspective, about we had enough local clients, not just in Georgia, but in the southeast of the US. One of the things about innovation, particularly from the startup model, is don't go for a national presence first. I would really encourage you to sell regionally, and this was something we were able to do. If you look at our footprint now, it's still more of a southeastern presence. You know, we've built over time, and really that's the way to think about it. You know, it's easier to go fix the customer's problems. It's less T&E. There's plenty of base here, I think, for you to build a business. And then last but not least, it's a geographical hub. You know, I moved our headquarters before we had the Atlanta operation, before we had the Conyers operation, to Seattle, Washington. And I could certainly assure you that if Columbus, Georgia is a destination spot that you don't sort of stop off on the way to somewhere else, there's no reason for going to visit Seattle, Washington unless you're going to Seattle, Washington, right, Matt? He's been there a few times. But we've really done very well with the Atlanta marketplace. It's a great location for us. And I think using many of the lessons that we've talked about today, many of the themes we've talked about today, these 2 guys in Conyers, Georgia, took a business without a nickel of outside money, and over a 15-year period built basically a $40 million company that was making about $10 million a year of profit. So those of you in the audience who are interested in that thing, you can do the math. You know, they made the shareholders happy. That was their wives. They made themselves happy, but they did it not by doing something that was particularly radical. They built an imaging solution, which became a document management solution, which we're now trying to figure out how do we make an ECM and BPM solution, you know, on its way to who knows what. We have no idea, but we have the talent and the base in Georgia, and if we continue to apply this notion of intellectual curiosity and think about the problems we're dealing with and keep looking for new ideas that are both incremental and revolutionary, that business will be more successful. And I hope if I come back here in 5 years, we'll be talking about 300, 400, 500 people in the Atlanta area, not a base of 150. So hopefully I've given you some ideas to think about. The other thing I just wanted to mention quickly is when I think about innovation, the other side of it, which we're not going to have time to talk about today, but for me is the other cornerstone, is flawless execution. And again, I think if you think about some of the companies that have been successful, even some of the ones we've talked about, it's not even so much that they had the best idea. It's not even so much that they had the brightest idea, they weren't first to the marketplace, they didn't have the most money. But when they had the idea and they saw it was starting to work and they were continuing to tweak it, they focused absolutely ruthlessly on execution. And again, back to the ImageWrite business, that's what they did. You know, Mike, who was building the product, was all about the product, but Don was all out there about making sure the service and support and the sales process and all those other things were flawlessly executed. And it's the combination of those two things. It's the intellectual curiosity, and it's a very clear focus on what happens after the sale. How do I actually deliver against that customer's expectations? How do I make sure they're happy when they actually buy the product and begin to implement it? That's what makes it successful. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention. It's great to be here in Georgia. I very much appreciate the chance to talk to you all. And I look forward to seeing you in weeks, months, and years ahead. Thank you very much.